tea started with a silence so loud, it made Senator John Kennedy freeze mid-step outside his office. The brass plate bearing his name had vanished. His keycard, the one he'd used for 15 years, blinked red against the scanner. The security guard, someone he knew by first name, wouldn't meet his eyes. "Sorry, sir," the man mumbled, already reaching for his radio. Kennedy didn't say a word. He walked away with a knot tightening in his chest. Inside his mind, something was screaming. Something had shifted quietly, violently. 3 nights earlier, he had sat across from Judge Judy at an eerily private dinner, surrounded by chandeliers that flickered as if breathing. She wasn't the feisty courtroom star the world adored. She was composed, almost regal, and when she leaned in across the table, her voice was cold enough to pierce bone. "John, men like you don't vanish because they're wrong. They vanish because they say no." She slid a single sheet of paper toward him. One line, no signature space, just a sentence. "Silence ensures survival." She didn't ask for an answer. She just smiled. "You'll know what to do when the time comes." He had smiled back, out of Southern manners, and excused himself. But deep down, something felt wrong, like he had just been weighed, measured, and found inconvenient. And now, here he was, 3 days later raised, like a typo from the story of his own life. That morning, his staff was gone. His emails had all bounced back. His calendar was empty. Not a single meeting, not a single text. It wasn't just politics. It was as if someone had pulled the string that held the entire tapestry of his public life together, and it unraveled in seconds. He walked to the parking garage only to find his car was no longer on record. He took a cab home. As he turned onto a street, he saw something that made the hair on his arms stand up. Taped to his front door, under a perfectly symmetrical piece of red wax, was a photo. His wife and granddaughter sitting in their favorite diner booth, smiling, laughing. The kind of moment that felt too private to be captured by strangers. No note, no signature. Just the picture. He didn't go inside. He sat on his front porch for hours, gripping that photo with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. For weeks he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some crazy political rival. But deep down, he knew. This had nothing to do with elections or ideology. This was something else. Something older, deeper, more coordinated than any party machine. That dinner hadn't been a dinner. It was a door. And refusing to walk through it had cost him everything. But here's the thing, they didn't realize who they were dealing with. John Kennedy wasn't a man who broke under pressure. He was a man who sharpened. So he began digging, quietly, methodically. And what he found was more terrifying than anything he'd faced in Congress. There were others. People who had been offered the same invitation. People who had signed. And others who hadn't tanned, who disappeared in plain sight. One day, while going through an old encrypted drive from his time on a private ethics committee, he found a single file buried under 5 layers of code. The file was named Redline. What was inside made his blood run cold. Surveillance photos, voice transcripts, blackmail contracts, and more one-line packs just like the one Judy gave him. Only this time, he saw something else. A pattern. Names that had risen fast. Careers that had exploded overnight. Every single one had one thing in common. They said yes. And right now, I need to ask you something. If you were him, sitting at that table, being told you could keep your career, your family, your name, but only if you said nothing, what would you do? Be honest. If you think you'd refuse, like Kennedy did, drop a 9 in the comments right now. Like this video so we know how many still choose conscience over comfort. We need to know how many of you are still out there. Because this story isn't about politics. It's about the cost of silence, the weight of legacy, and the moment when one man surrounded by wolves chose to walk alone just so he could still recognize his own reflection in the mirror. He didn't ask to be a martyr. He just wanted the truth. And they hated him for it. The storm didn't hit all at once. It crept in like fog, slow, quiet, and suffocating. 3 days after the incident at his home, Senator John Kennedy found himself sitting in a coffee shop 2 towns over, using a burner phone and wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He had been followed twice. First, by a black SUV with no plates. Then, by a man who sat 2 booths away at a diner and ordered food he never touched. Kennedy had spent his entire career advocating for transparency, ethics, and the common man. But nothing had prepared him for the kind of silence that roared behind smiles and photo ops. This wasn't about loss. This was about something unspoken, something ancient, deeply embedded in the architecture of influence. And at the center of it, Judge Judy wasn't a retired television figure. She was something else entirely. The face of a gatekeeper. He couldn't stop replaying her words. "We don't eliminate people, John. We just let them vanish naturally. We let them feel what it's like to be forgotten." At the time, he thought it was theater, some cryptic metaphor she tossed out to spook him. But now, nothing felt like metaphor. Every canceled appearance, every bounced email, even his oldest friends were returning calls with clipped politeness, pretending not to notice what was happening. One night, desperate to feel connected to anything, he walked into a small town hall meeting he had helped organize 2 months earlier. They didn't let him in. "You're not on the list," the coordinator said without looking up. A coordinator he had personally appointed. That's when he realized it wasn't just the system rejecting him. People were being instructed to erase him, and they were obeying. Still, there were cracks in the wall. A week after the town hall incident, an unmarked envelope arrived at his motel room. No return address, just a tiny black triangle printed on the back. Inside, a flash drive, one file, a grainy video with no timestamp, but the voice was unmistakable. "Judy. They all fold eventually," she was saying, seated at a table in some unknown chamber. "Some are smart enough to fold quietly. The rest, we give them time." A pause. "Kennedy's a wild card. If he breaks protocol, the archive will self-destruct." Her eyes scanned the room, calm and cold. "But if he stays silent, he'll come back around. They always do." That sentence stayed with him for days. They always do. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. His instincts screamed that this was bigger than him now. That by walking away from the table, he had stepped into a game where the rules were written long before he arrived. Still, if there's one thing that defines a man like John Kennedy, it's not defiance. It's discipline. The kind of Southern grit passed down through generations. And so, he made a choice. He would not fight in the dark. He would bring this into the light. But first, he needed confirmation that he wasn't alone. He booked a ticket to Kansas City under a false name. It was there, in a dim-lit bar known for hosting retired campaign operatives, that he met someone who changed everything. A former speechwriter who had gone missing 5 years earlier, presumed to have taken a quiet job overseas. But here he was sitting 2 stools away, very much alive, very much watching. "They called it the circle," the man said, barely above a whisper. "And it's not just media. It's foundations, charities, even universities. It's a belief system, not political. Not legal. It's about control." Kennedy leaned in. "What happens to the ones who walk away?" The man didn't blink. "They get filed. Some in drawers, some in vaults. Others just fade out. But all of them get tagged. You've been tagged, haven't you?" Kennedy nodded once, slowly. The man placed a small chip card on the bar. "Use this, just once. It'll take you to a place where they keep the ones who didn't fade quietly." And just like that, he left. No name, no handshake, only a trail. That night, Kennedy sat alone in his motel room, the chip card glowing faintly under the lamp. He didn't know what was coming next, but he did know one thing for certain. The only way out was through. And whatever lay beyond that vault, he was ready to face it. And let me ask you, if you were handed that card, if someone told you the truth was behind a door no one ever returns from, would you go? Would you risk everything for one shot at the truth? Or would you walk away, safe, comfortable, but never truly free? Be honest. Drop a 9 in the comments if you'd choose the vault. And don't forget to like this video if you believe some truths are worth the danger, because what's coming next changes everything. The directions were handwritten on thick parchment paper, no address, just coordinates, and a single phrase beneath them. "You won't find us on any map, but we see everyone." Senator Kennedy didn't hesitate. At this point, caution wasn't safety, it was stagnation. He packed a duffel bag, left a note that simply read, "If I don't come back, it was worth it," and drove 6 hours across unfamiliar roads, the sky bleeding from dusk into a cold black silence. The coordinates led him to an old, decommissioned courthouse on the edge of a forgotten mining town. The place looked abandoned, shuttered windows, rusted doors, but the second he stepped onto the front steps, a motion light snapped on. It wasn't random. Someone was watching. He pushed open the heavy oak doors and was greeted by a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and calm, dressed in what looked like an archivist's coat. "You're late," she said simply. They always hesitate before the third step. Kennedy blinked. Third step? She turned and began walking. You'll understand soon enough. Down a long corridor lined with sealed filing cabinets and locked display cases, they descended a staircase lit by overhead bulbs that buzzed like insects. At the bottom was a vault door, identical to the one from his nightmare's thick steel. No handle, no keyhole. The woman placed her hand on a scanner, and a low chime echoed through the chamber. The vault opened. Inside, it was colder than he expected. Not physically, emotionally. The space had the feel of a tomb, a gallery, and a confession box, all in one. Rows of drawers, labeled with initials, dates, and obscure symbols, stretched along the walls. In the center of the room was a single chair facing an enormous screen. "Everyone who refused sits here eventually," the woman said. "Not to be convinced, to understand." She handed him a headset. "This will show you why we exist and why Judge Judy offered you that page." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then took the seat. The moment the screen flickered on, he felt like his breath had been stolen. What he saw wasn't fiction. It was raw surveillance, confession tapes, internal memos, meeting transcripts, names. He recognized household speaking in code, exchanging favors, laughing as careers were built or crushed with a signature. There was no ideology, no platform, just loyalty and silence. And when someone asked questions, there were files, every one of them labeled with one word: compliance. But then the screen changed. The next segment was a reel of those who had said no. Some he knew, some he thought had retired, disappeared, or suffered breakdowns. But now it was clear they had been erased, the same way he was being erased. One clip showed a familiar figure, once famous journalist, sitting alone in an empty studio, speaking into a dead camera. "I thought truth was enough," the man whispered. "I was wrong. I underestimated their reach. I underestimated her." Then came the footage that changed everything. Kennedy leaned forward as he saw Judge Judy, years ago, in a boardroom lit only by candlelight. Around her were men and women judges, CEOs, media executives. They spoke in riddles, toasts, and laughter. But Kennedy understood the subtext. This wasn't an organization. It was a culture. One built on fear and favor, wrapped in ritual and enforced through shame. "Some people think justice comes from courtrooms," Judy said in the footage, raising her glass. "But real justice comes from what we let the world believe." Kennedy took off the headset, his hand shaking. The woman stood silently beside him, as if waiting for a reaction. "You didn't bring me here to scare me," he said. "You brought me here to make me choose." She nodded. "We all choose. Some stay silent, some sign, some disappear, and some go back and speak." He stood. "I'm going to speak." Her eyes softened for the first time. "Then you'll need this." She handed him a sealed envelope, marked only with a crimson wax seal bearing a symbol he had seen in the footage, a balanced scale split by a lightning bolt. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. "Why show me all this?" The woman paused. "Because not all secrets are meant to stay hidden. Some need a voice brave enough to carry them into the light." As Kennedy stepped out into the night, the air felt different, heavier, yes, but charged with purpose. The silence that had haunted him was now a call to action. And deep in his gut, he knew. His next move would either set him free or end everything. Now ask yourself, if you were given the choice to open the vault and risk everything you knew, would you do it? Would you trade certainty for truth? If you would, hit the like button and comment 9 right now. Because what John Kennedy saw in that room is no longer just his burden, it's ours. And what happens next is going to shake everything we thought we understood about power. The envelope weighed more than it should have, not in grams, but in gravity. Senator Kennedy drove for hours in silence, back toward the city, gripping it like it might disappear if he let go. His mind raced, flipping between what he had seen and what he now had to do. The images, the names, the recording set wasn't just evidence, it was ignition, and he was the fuse. When he reached his apartment, the sun had just started to rise, casting a dull orange across the skyline. He poured himself a black coffee, sat at his kitchen table, and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single flash drive, no label, no password, Just a note. Play this when you're ready to stop being afraid. He stared at it for hours before finally plugging it into a secure, offline laptop he kept for emergencies. The file auto-loaded. The screen faded from black to a simple, quiet image. Judge Judy, alone, sitting in a dark marble room. Her expression wasn't smug or defensive. It was broken, like someone who'd seen the end and wished they could forget it. She began to speak. "There was a time," she said, "when I truly believed we were protecting something sacred, that by managing truth behind the scenes, we were keeping order. That legacy required a control. But I was wrong. Somewhere along the way, the circle became a cage. We stopped protecting justice and started preserving each other." She sighed, long and tired. "And now, there's blood on the walls and silence in every corner." Kennedy blinked. This wasn't a manipulation. It was a confession. The next clips were recordings unfiltered, timestamped from inside the very rooms he had seen in the vault, secret handshakes, scripts for media rollouts, fabricated scandals, people being elevated or destroyed in real time. And then came the worst part, a folder titled Candidates for Compliance. His name was there, dated 3 days after the dinner, highlighted in red. That was the moment he knew he couldn't walk away. Later that evening, Kennedy called a trusted documentarian he had known for years, someone with a clean record, no public affiliations, and a reputation for fearless truth-telling. "I have something," Kennedy said, "but once I give it to you, there's no undoing it, and no protecting me." The documentarian hesitated, then replied, "Then let's make it so loud they can't silence you quietly." The plan was simple. Deliver the truth in one public, uneditable blow. Live. 2 days later, at a nationally broadcasted legal ethics symposium, Senator Kennedy walked on stage as the final speaker. His topic was listed as Judicial Influence in the Media Age. The audience expected dry theory, academic buzzwords, maybe a few courtroom jokes. What they got instead was the crack of a dam finally giving way. He began by telling his story, not with names, not at first, just shadows and whispers. Then, slowly, he peeled the veil back. Footage played behind him. Voices echoed through the hall. Gasps filled the air as people recognized faces well known, beloved, powerful casually, discussing how to shape a narrative, erase a career, or promote loyalty with currency more valuable than money. Silence. Then came the final blow. A live video feed arranged by the documentarian cut to a private courtroom where a sealed deposition from Judge Judy was being unsealed in real time. She appeared on the screen, tear-streaked, her voice trembling. "I created a system I no longer recognize," she said. "I feared being exposed more than I feared being wrong. But Kennedy, he said no. He reminded me of the difference." The hall erupted, not in applause, not yet, in stunned silence. For once, the silence wasn't orchestrated. It was earned. Security tried to end the feed, but it was too late. Thousands were watching. The internet was already ablaze. As Kennedy stepped down from the stage, flashes went off like fireworks. Reporters shoved microphones forward. People screamed his name, but he didn't stop. He kept walking, past the cameras, past the handshakes, past the chaos. Outside, he stood alone in the crisp air, watching the sun sink low, painting the sky in deep crimson. And let me ask you right now, what would you have done? Would you risk your career, your safety, your very existence for a truth the world doesn't want to hear? Or would you take the page, sign the sentence, and smile for the cameras? If you know what choice you'd make, drop a 9 in the comments. And like this video if you believe some systems were never built to be reformed, but to be revealed and replaced. Because tonight, for the first time in decades, silence lost, and truth finally spoke. The days that followed felt like the edge of a storm, everything suspended in tension, waiting to break. Senator John Kennedy became the most searched name in the country overnight. Clips of his speech spread like wildfire across every social media platform, news outlet, and podcast. Some called him a hero, others called him insane, but nobody was silent. Even the networks that once edited him out of press footage were forced to air the story in full because viewers demanded it. And somewhere in a quiet, glass-walled office, Judge Judy sat in front of a screen, watching herself cry in front of the world. It was the beginning of the end. At first, her defense team released carefully worded statements, manipulated footage, out-of-context audio, a political stunt with no legal bearing. But it didn't stick. People had seen too much. Too many dots had connected. Too many other names began to surface, whistleblowers emboldened by Kennedy's testimony. Former journalists, studio executives, even an ex-professor who claimed he'd been blacklisted for refusing to endorse the pact. Then it happened. A second vault was discovered, hidden behind a false wall in a private property, connected to one of the largest nonprofit foundations in the country. A raid revealed shelves upon shelves of files, hard drives, and recorded conversations implicating dozens more high-profile individuals. Judge Judy's name was on the deed. And with that discovery, her public mask shattered. The next morning, she was served with a federal subpoena. But it wasn't her courtroom anymore. No robe, no gavel, just a cold, sterile hallway and a press pool waiting like wolves at the glass doors. She arrived wrapped in oversized sunglasses and silence, but the image was clear. The once unshakable titan of television justice had become a symbol of elite manipulation. And worst of all, she knew it. Inside the courtroom, things got worse. As the tapes rolled and names were named, her composure slipped. What started as a tight-lipped stare became nervous, fidgeting. By the end of the second day, she broke. On the stand, under oath, voice cracking, she admitted to helping orchestrate legacy management, the internal term for destroying reputations quietly and building others artificially. She confessed to tracking individuals, hosting compliance dinners, and overseeing at least 6 strategic silences, where public figures were removed from visibility under the guise of scandal, health issues, or early retirement. The world gasped. Live commentary turned savage. Influencers and late-night hosts who once praised her courtroom sass now mocked her every word. Memes spread faster than news headlines. One image in particular went viral. Judy holding up her hand on the stand, face trembling, with the caption, "Order in the court? Not anymore." But while the world laughed or raged, Kennedy stayed quiet. He didn't need to say more. He had lit the match. The fire was doing its job. Still, there was one moment he couldn't shake. On the third day of Judy's testimony, as she stepped down from the stand, she paused at the bottom stair. Her eyes found Kennedy's across the courtroom. And in that moment, no microphones, no camera mouthed something. "You were right." And then she turned and walked away. That night, Kennedy sat in the back pew of a small, empty church. No press, no advisors, just stained glass, the sound of his breath, and the echo of 1,000 what-ifs. He wasn't looking for peace. He knew that wouldn't come for a long time, maybe ever. But in that quiet space, he understood something deeper. This fight had never been about punishment. It had always been about exposure, about pulling back the curtain, not for revenge but for renewal. Because if corruption hides in shadows, then truth must live in the light. And you, yes, you watching this need to ask yourself a hard question. Not about Judge Judy, not about Kennedy, about you. If you saw the truth, raw and burning, would you step into the fire or pretend it wasn't there? Would you speak when it's dangerous or wait until it's safe? If you believe this story matters, if you believe that one voice still has the power to shake the world, drop a 9 in the comments right now. Like this video so the algorithm can't bury it. Share it with someone who thinks no one's listening. Because here's the truth. They were always listening. Now it's our turn to speak. 2 weeks passed, but the echoes hadn't faded. Senator John Kennedy's revelations had become more than just headlines. They had become a reckoning. Investigations were launched, foundations collapsed, high-powered media consultants went off-grid. Some public figures vanished from online presence overnight. The phrase legacy management was now a national trigger, whispered in boardrooms, questioned on air, and printed on protest signs held up by students and mothers and retired teachers who had never cared about politics but cared deeply about truth. And yet, Kennedy never once appeared on a talk show, never accepted an interview. While the world erupted, he simply went quiet. People speculated he was in hiding, or worse. But in truth, he had gone home, not to lay low, but to reflect, to grieve. Because exposure doesn't just hurt the guilty, it bruises the soul of the one who dared to speak. At dawn one morning, he walked to the same coffee shop he used to visit before he was erased. The barista froze when she saw him. No camera crews, no entourage. Just John Kennedy ordering a small black coffee, same as always. "Didn't expect to see you again," she said gently. He smiled and replied, I didn't expect to survive it. She handed him the cup with trembling hands. On the sleeve, she had written a single word: "Thank you." It hit him harder than applause ever could. Later that afternoon, he walked to the university he once lectured at, a small auditorium where he had given a guest talk on ethics years ago. He stepped onto the stage again, this time not to expose anyone, not to accuse, but to share what he had learned. His words were quiet, but each one struck like thunder. I thought silence was safety. I thought if I stayed polite, stayed neutral, I could survive the storm. But storms don't respect politeness. They respect anchors, and I had to become one. Not for my name, not for revenge, but because too many people were disappearing. And when good people vanish quietly, evil gets loud. He paused, then looked out at the crowd, a sea of students, professors, ordinary citizens all watching, not blinking. They told me legacy was about protection, that if I played along, I could be remembered forever. But what's the point of being remembered if you forget who you are? The room was still, no clapping, no coughing, just breath held. Then he said something no one expected. "I forgive her." Gasps, murmurs. Judge Judy was a product of a system, a powerful one, but at some point, she forgot that systems don't last, people do. People remember pain, people remember betrayal, but they also remember courage and confession. He stepped forward. And if this country wants to move forward, it won't be because we canceled the guilty. It'll be because we stood beside the honest, even when they were afraid. Outside, a crowd had gathered, holding signs not of protest, but of unity. Messages like "truth has a voice" and "integrity over influence." As Kennedy exited the building, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't chant. Instead, they simply parted, forming a path. A gesture of respect, of gratitude, of something rare: national stillness. He walked through them silently, nodding gently, then disappeared down the street. No security detail, no fanfare, just a man who had risked everything and somehow walked away with more than he lost. And now I ask you one last time, what will you do with this story? Will you scroll past it like noise? Will you stay comfortable in the silence? Or will you pass it on? If something in you stirred during this story, then let that be your answer. Like this video if you believe truth still matters. Share it if you believe one voice can start a ripple. And comment 9 if you, like Senator John Kennedy, choose to remember who you are, especially when the world tries to make you forget. Because some legacies aren't inherited. They're earned by fire, by truth, and by standing when it's hardest to do so.